straight to our next fireside chat. So our next fireside chat host is a returning Pennsylvania host, Nico Bonatzos, and he is a managing director at General Catalyst, a venture capital firm with now over $8 billion raised across 10 funds over the last 20 years. So obviously a major player in the industry. And Nico himself has been instrumental in investments such as Snap, formerly known as Snapchat, Hive, and Remote.com. He has attended Stanford University as a Fulbright scholar and earned an MS in Management Science and Engineering. And he is going today in his conversation with Job van der Voort from Remote he will explore the challenges and opportunities in building a remote culture, something that's more urgent now than ever. So I hope all of you are going to enjoy that. And please join me in welcoming Job and Nico. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Job. How are you today?
Hey, Nico. Good to see you.
Great to see you. I'm very glad we're doing this together to talk about challenges and opportunities in building a remote culture. Couldn't think of a better person for this conversation than you.
Yeah, I know one or two things about that, I think.
Of course. So let's get this started through talking a bit about your background, because you've been a serial founder, executive, leading product and leading companies. So connect the dots a bit for us.
Yeah. So my background originally is in neuroscience, so very unrelated, very much not remote either. You have to be in a lab to actually do most science. But briefly after that, I started my own startup, went nowhere, ended up running GitLab and led product there. And of course, GitLab was fully a distributed company. So we started the company with like 5 guys in 4 different countries, never got an office, and just grew the company like that. And so we learned, you could say the hard way, but in reality, it was not that hard. We learned by growing the company how to make this scalable. And I think one thing that we struggled with is hiring internationally and solving for payroll, compliance, and benefits, which is why I started Remote, which is, of course, 1, it solves all those problems, and 2, is also a fully remote organization with now just over 400 employees. So yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make this work without having any offices and without ever seeing each other in person.
Terrific. So what are some of the lessons learned from running product with a distributed team at GitLab?
I think the first and foremost is that although there is some natural advantage of being together in person, that disappears if you start to form some processes and some standards around how you communicate with each other and how you really want to work together. Right? I think one of the first things people say is but how do I do whiteboarding remotely? How do I, collaborate remotely? And I think it's good to start reevaluating what is it that we're really doing in these moments. How often do we actually whiteboard? What is it? How big of a role is that in the actual work that we're doing? And then could we replace that by using, for example, Mural, right? Or Miro, one of these tools, or even Figma, for example, and just doing that. And what we found was that, yes, that is completely sufficient to do so. You can actually do so. A large part of the work that we're doing, and especially in product, is sucking up information essentially and then writing something. And that's all really doable without directly interacting with people. And if that's the majority of your work, it means that your work becomes incredibly accessible to do remotely, and not just remotely, but also asynchronously. So you don't even have to have that many hours of overlap with the people that you work together. I think that's one of the main ones. Other than that, the fundamentals of product is how do you build a good product? It's there's not a direct answer to that. It's really hard to solve for, but it's the one thing you're trying to do that doesn't really change. The muscles you have to use for that are the same. And that doesn't really change whether you can see each other or not in person.
Terrific. So now I'm sure there are founders that are watching us today and they're thinking about going fully remote or starting a new remote team. What kind of tips would you have for them?
Well, the first one would be to just do it, because it's going to save you a whole shitload of money, right? I don't even know how expensive offices are, but I think they're pretty expensive. And it's a large chunk of any funding that you're going to get, right? As you progressively get larger offices. I think beyond that, the one and most important thing to think about is that if you're used to an office environment, that everything you get for free in an office, you have to be explicit about in a remote environment. And it could be explicitly not doing certain things. But it also means that you explicitly have to do certain things. And those certain things are things like making sure people get to know each other. In an office, this happens because you're close to each other. You walk into the office and you see the other person. You say hi in the morning. Those little rituals, they help form a connection between people. Now, in a remote setting, you lose 100% of these. And it's not to say that you have to replicate all of them. And in fact, I would encourage you not to do that, because you're going to create a culture where everybody works at the same hours and you have a lot of calls. No, you don't want to do that. But you do want to create occasion for people to connect with each other, for people to start to get to know each other. And so you have to think about that. You have to think, how am I going to do that in my company? And as your company grows, you have to do different things, because there's very little examples of companies working fully remotely for a long time or at a particular scale. If you have a company maybe with only a few people, you don't have to spend much time thinking about this because you're just a few. So it's very easy to coordinate. But once you get to like 100 people in total, you get to a scale where very few companies have existed that have worked fully remotely for long periods of time with 100 people. And so you have to realize that you have to invent the wheel in some regards. And even if you copy, for example, Remote's handbook, which is public at handbook.remote.com, it might not work for you because we're a very different organization than yours. So I think that's the most important thing, is that you have to really start thinking from fundamentals. What do we want to achieve and how are we going to achieve this? And it could be very different than what you did before, and it can be very different than what other people are doing.
Absolutely. So now there's a lot of conversation about companies staying as a fully remote in the tech universe, or like going into a hybrid mode, especially since we're trying to go to the new normal post-COVID. How would you think about it? Like hybrid versus fully remote?
Hybrid is by far the hardest way to work, because if anyone in a team, one person works remotely, everybody has to act as if they're working remotely, or that one person that is remote will feel isolated because they won't have access to the same information. And so I would say that first decide, what does it mean hybrid? Does it mean that everybody works from the office certain days in a week? Because if that's the case, you can't hire anybody outside of the vicinity of the office, right? So you lose a lot of the advantages. Does it mean that if you live close to the office, you can go there or you must go there? Or does it mean something entirely different? In all situations, the moment one person is working remotely, everybody must act as if they're working remotely. And that is challenging, and especially challenging if you're not used to that, or if you have people that are always at the office who never have the occasion to really flex this muscle. They will never be forced to flex this muscle because, well, they are never working remotely. And so they can just shout across their desk to the other people that they're working together with. So generally, I would recommend companies say, look, try to embrace fully remote and allow anybody to work remotely whenever they want, how much they want, and try to hire outside of the vicinity of the office. I do think that if you have an office, if you have a space where people can come together, that's really nice, because it's great to be together. Like, you should never deny that reality, that it's actually fun to be together. I love to be together. I am coming from a hotel room and I'm here in London, and I was like, of course I took the opportunity to meet some of my colleagues face to face. You know, that's a great thing to do. So if you have an office, that's a good reason to do it. But be very aware that you don't want to create an A team and a B team, a team that connects really closely together, works together very closely because they're all in the same space, and the rest of the company feels, isolated, because that will just validate your hypothesis of, well, in the office it works better. Yes, it will work better because those people have no threshold to talk to each other.
Totally. So let's say that I'm an executive that just left my job. I've never tried working for a distributed team. You're a founder, you're interested in me, you want to hire me. What would you say to me? Like, why is remote work great for me? Potentially, why would it suck? What would you say?
So the first thing I would say is that you got to try it. Like, there's certain freedoms that you get with remote work that are there's no equal to them, right? You can immediately live wherever you want. You can be traveling all the time during your work if that's what you want. You can go to a tropical island and work from there, and to the company it makes no real difference. Then there's other freedoms that are seemingly very simple, but they have huge impact in your life, such as the ability to do groceries in the middle of the day, which is still one of my favorite things. Like I go get lunch in the middle of the day and do my groceries at the same time because there's no one there. It's like it's such a luxury. And then if you start to realize those are the freedoms that you get, then maybe the other concerns that you have, you can sort of ignore them or take them as like concessions and just find out on the job. And then because what you will find is that if you work together remotely effectively, so it means you're not in Zoom meetings all day, then it can be really, really nice because you get the opportunity to create the space that you want to work in. And that space could be a co-working space. That space could be something close with other colleagues, or that could be like how I prefer to work from home, which is, you have an environment that you're very, very comfortable in, and you can attend every meeting like I do without socks. I'm not wearing shoes or socks in almost every meeting, but no one knows but that's how I'm comfortable. Like I think you have to make the step. And I think there's sufficient data and there's sufficient people that say, well, this is great and this has worked for me. And sufficient people that have been working from offices for 30 years and now say, oh, this is actually very, very nice. Like I would say, like, listen to those people and at least give it a try. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to the office. I'm sure there's someone.
That's right. Yeah. If startup doesn't work out, you can always go back to one of the big tech companies for sure. Then let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about like companies and individuals working across many time zones. How do you deal with that? Like, it's a huge challenge for both the company and the individual.
It's a huge challenge. Like, I think no matter what you say, working across time zones is really, really challenging. And if you have a team that is spread across three like very separate time zones, it's nearly impossible to do any kind of synchronous work, meaning like getting together and collaborating directly or having quick back and forth. That is simply impossible. And yet, that has nothing to do with your willingness or how good you are at asynchronous work. That has to do with the fact that you're not awake at the same time, and like you will not be able to do this. And so thinking about time zones has to be something that you're doing. The reality of most work is that you don't need many overlapping hours, but 0 overlapping hours, which is definitely possible, right? That can totally happen if you're, for example, in the UK and you work with someone in New Zealand or in Australia. It's going to be very difficult to have many overlapping hours, if any at all. And so the best way to think about this is that if your team is small, it's good to have them somewhat close by in time zone. And I always think about like a sliding window where you say, well, we have, let's say, the median time zone, and then we take +2 plus a -2 hours around that we're happy to hire in. And as your team grows, you can start to expand that. Now, for always, you must remember that you cannot just hire someone far away and then have their colleagues that they work directly with in their team to be all in very distant time zones. It can work. I've seen it work, but it's incredibly rare. It's much easier to say, as we grow, maybe one of these teams that we put together, they're somewhat around a particular time zone, or at most splitting 2 separate time zones, right? For example, Western Europe and the US works because at the end of the day in Western Europe, in the morning of the US, they have enough time to sync to each other. The same, you can take those blocks and put them across the world, but it will never happen to have someone in Western US, West Europe, and then somewhere in Asia. Those 3, they will never meet. And any decision that they want to make is going to take weeks, because if they have a single back and forth where everyone contributes, it takes more than 24 hours. And that's way too long to make any kind of decision. So time zones are awful. You have to deal with it. There's no magical solution to it. You have to work asynchronously, which is, you make sure you write everything down. But that is not a solution for long cycle times, long decision times that you take when you have many people, many different time zones.
That's right. So you're the CEO of Remote.com, which is like a payroll company for fully distributed teams and their distributed talent. So let's spice it up then and talk about comp, because there has been a lot of chatter about paying people less if they move out of San Francisco or any expensive city. Like, what are you seeing? What's happening with all our customers at Remote.com? What advice do you give to people that reach out to you?
Yeah, I think there's the conversation that always happens is that if I move location, the value that I provide to the company is the same, and therefore I should be compensated fairly, which I think is completely valid reasoning, right? Yes, that is completely valid. The reality for an organization is that I'm going to pay someone what I need to pay them for them to stay in my company, right? We can create a reality in which company pay everybody what they're worth, but what they're worth is a market working, right? And so a company will always try to optimize for, well, I don't want to pay everybody $1 million a year, even though I might have that money, because that would be not a good decision. I can't hire as many people. And so those two realities, they sort of collide in a world where we say, well, you can hire from anywhere, right? Like, and we generally pay people well, and like companies like Remote that are really well funded, they might have the money to spend on all of these people. And so how do you consolidate that? Well, the reality is somewhere in between. I think that we see a few different things. The first one we see is that generally people are really well paid, particularly in distributed organizations, right? Which is usually funded companies, usually companies that do relatively well, usually forward-running companies that try to be innovative. Generally, people are being paid really well according to local standards. They're being paid more than their neighbor in almost all situations, right? Like that, there's almost no exception to this, independent of where they live. We see very, very, very few companies that pay everybody in the planet the same. The moment that this happens is that they struggle with all sorts of problems. The first thing that happens is that, well, what do you pay people then? Either you're going to say, well, we're not going to hire people that live in a more expensive regions of the planet where you need a high salary to live, or you're going to pay everybody the same, and you can hire a limited number of people, a lower number that you would otherwise could, and you might struggle with, for example, filtering out because you get so many applicants because you pay everybody so well. So that's a really, really challenging situation. The other direction is also really challenging, saying, well, we're going to pay local rate, because then you create large income discrepancies within your organization. If I hire someone in San Francisco or London, I have to pay them 200,000 US a year, and I hire someone in India and I have to pay them 10,000 a year, that's a ridiculous discrepancy, of course, right? And so how are we going to make that happen? Now, so what we did internally at Remote, and what I advise anybody to do, is we say we have a global minimum. So anybody that works for us directly, so in our company, not through one of our customers, earns at least 40,000 US a year, which is not everywhere a great salary, but in most of the planet, it's a great salary. And then beyond that, we say, well, for every region, we try to be somewhat competitive locally. Right? And that region is a really rough cut, a large part, right? Like Western Europe. It's not per country because then you have to keep country data up to date. That is sort of how we approach it. And even that is not the perfect solution. It's very, very difficult to maintain it. It might not last forever. And I think this is one of the learnings of like building a remote working company. You have to treat everything as an experiment, because this will probably break sometime in the future when maybe salaries will become global. But I think the one thing you don't want to do is pay people extremely low salary relative to the median in your organization, right? It's unethical and it's unnecessary. You just don't have to do that. And what you also will probably not want to do as any kind of organization is say, we're going to pay everybody the same. That is not sustainable. Not if you're a VC-backed company that wants to grow fast. You will not be able to hire as many people as you would want. And even then, that level, paying everybody the same, is going to go up all the time. Right? It's going to go up forever because the market is highly competitive. So in any local market, you'll be finding that you have to be competitive there. And so if you're going to pay everybody the same, you'll probably have to be competitive in the most expensive market, which means that you're going to pay everybody really, really high salaries, which is great for the individual, but for the company, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Terrific. Thank you for this thorough answer. And at Remote, you now have 400 people?
Yeah, that's correct.
In 2.5 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I think about 370 of them in the last 12 months, something like that.
Incredible. So in terms of hiring then remotely, what tips do you have, especially for companies like yours that are growing really quickly?
Yeah, I think it's about having great fundamentals, right? Build a really strong company culture. Again, compensate fairly, have clear job descriptions so that people know what kind of work they can do, and have a really clearly defined hiring process so that, again, you make sure that everybody, if you don't pay attention to these kind of things, you're going to end up with a very biased way of hiring people, and everybody that you're going to hire is going to be the same kind of person. And you really don't want to run into that situation. Beyond that, you can easily assume that there's still a very large demand for great remote jobs. And it's a weird situation because I feel like there's a massive demand for talent, more than that there seems to be a supply of talent. But at the same time, there's also massive demand for great remote work and great remote jobs. And so if you as a company position yourself as this is a great place to work, it's going to be very easy to find people. And actually the main problem you have to deal with is how do I make sure out of all these applicants, I hired one or two people that match our values and our culture the best. And I think that is the actual challenge that you're going to face.
Absolutely. And since you're the CEO of remote.com, if I'm a founder looking for payroll compliance solution, what would you say to me? What should I be considering?
What should you be? Because I mean, you should just work with us. Like it's incredibly difficult to hire international and make sure that you're compliant, but also to make sure that you can just be fair, right? Like be a good employer in any given market. It's really, really hard. We solve that, and we solve it for a reason because we feel like this is the most complex thing to do, and we try to make it as cheap as possible, right? Like if we could, we would reduce the cost on our side at least to absolutely zero. And so, like my advice would be: one, hire the best person you can find. Don't think too much about where they live, other than the time zone. And two, don't worry about the bureaucracy of this. Just focus on just work with a company, but preferably with mine. But if we don't do a good job, definitely with one of our competitors. Just the best situation for everybody involved. The one thing I can recommend strongly against is to hire everybody immediately as contractors, because you will have to change them into full-time employees. At the moment you have any kind of tax scare locally, you hire too many people, your company grows a little bit bigger, or because, well, you actually are liable to do so, you should just make it as easy as possible and start with that and not go through the whole conversion later on.
Lovely. Job, thank you so much for dropping so much wisdom today and for spending time with us. Of course, thank you to the amazing organizers of this phenomenal conference. And with that, I think we go back to Philip.
Thanks, Nico.
Thank you, Job. Thank you, Nico, so much. I'm convinced. I'm trying to convince my organization definitely to become a customer of yours, Job. So I hope not only us, but hopefully some of the others you manage to convince that this new way of remote workforce and finding the best people anywhere in the world is the future to go. So thank you so much for a great talk. And thanks, Nico, for your moderation of this and coming back to join us at Techsylvania. As we said, next time, the fund is hopefully 10 billion. So we're waiting for that next year again. Thank you so much, both.
Hopefully remote.com is worth 10 billion, but we'll see. Yeah, I'm just joking. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.